The crystal ships moved through space like dancing stars. Each one was beautiful, made from living crystal that glowed with soft blue light. The Zephrians had built these ships with their own hands over many years. They were not just machines. They were works of art that could travel between the stars. Commander Ethes stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dawn. She was tall and thin, like all her people. Her skin had a silver shine to it, and her eyes were the color of deep space. She watched the darkness ahead with worry. Something was coming. Something that should not exist. The Zephrians had been the teachers of the galaxy for 3,000 years. When young races first looked up at the stars and dreamed of flying among them, it was the Zephrians who came to help. They shared their knowledge freely. They never asked for payment. They only wanted to see other species grow and learn. Ethes remembered the first time she had visited Earth, long before humans had rockets that could reach their own moon. She had watched them from orbit, these strange creatures who fought each other but also created beautiful music and art. The Zephrians had decided to wait. Humans were not ready yet. But someday they would be. The same thing had happened with 36 other races. The Corvani had been living in caves when the Zephrians first found them. Now they ruled 100 worlds. The Vekmori had been dying from a plague that would have killed them all. Zephrian medicine had saved them. The Veltar had been trapped on a world that was running out of water. Zephrian technology had given them the stars. Every major race in the galaxy owed their survival to the Zephrians. This was not a secret, everyone knew it. The Galactic Council had been formed around Zephrian ideals of peace and cooperation. For 3 millennia, the crystal cities of Zephr Prime had been the center of galactic civilization, but now something was wrong. Very wrong. The first reports had come from the Outer Rim, where few people lived. Mining stations had gone silent. Entire colonies had simply vanished. When scout ships were sent to investigate, they found nothing. Not wreckage, not bodies. Nothing at all. It was as if millions of people had simply stopped existing. Then the refugees began to arrive. They came in broken ships, telling impossible stories. They spoke of things that moved through space like sharks through water. Things that ate planets. Things that turned living beings into more of themselves. At first, the Galactic Council had not believed the reports. Mass hysteria, they said, fear of the unknown. But when an entire star system went dark in a single day, they began to listen. The Devourers, as the refugees called them, were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were not truly alive, but they were not machines either. They were something in between, something hungry. They moved in huge swarms, each one the size of a city. When they found a world with life on it, they would descend like a plague. They did not kill for anger or hate. They killed because they needed to. They consumed all living matter and turned it into more devourers. They learned from everything they ate. They grew stronger with each world they destroyed. The Zephrians had been the first to respond. Of course they had. It was what they always did. When there was danger in the galaxy, the Zephrians stood up to face it. When there was suffering, they tried to heal it. When there was fear, they brought hope. Ethes had led the first fleet herself. 50 of their best ships, crewed by volunteers who knew they might not come home. They had met the Devourers at the edge of the Helix Nebula, in a system that had once been home to 5 billion Altarian colonists. The battle had been a nightmare. The Devourers moved like living things, but they thought like machines. They learned from every weapon that was used against them. Energy beams that cut through their hulls the first time barely scratched them the second. Missiles that destroyed dozens of them became useless after the first volley, but the worst part was watching them feed. When a Zephrian ship was damaged and could not escape, the Devourers would swarm it. They would tear it apart piece by piece, absorbing not just the metal and crystal, but the crew as well. Ethes had watched her people disappear into those hungry maws, their life force being added to the enemy's strength. The Zephrians had been forced to retreat. It was the first time in their history that they had fled from a battle, but they were not cowards. They were practical. They needed to warn the galaxy. They needed to prepare. That had been 6 months ago. Since then, the Devourers had consumed 12 more star systems. They were moving toward the core worlds, where most of the galaxy's population lived. The Zephrians had tried everything they could think of: new weapons, new tactics, new technologies. Nothing worked. The Devourers adapted to everything. They learned from every defeat. They grew stronger with every victory, and they were getting closer to Zephr Prime. Every day, the Zephrians had done something they had never done before in their long history. They had asked for help. The message had been sent to every member of the Galactic Council. It was simple and direct. The Zephrians needed allies. They needed ships and crews and weapons. They needed the galaxy to stand together against this threat. They had been very careful not to demand anything. They had simply asked. They had reminded the other races of their long friendship. They had promised to share any new technologies they developed in the fight. They had offered to put their entire fleet under joint command. They had even offered to give up their leadership of the Galactic Council if that would help convince others to join them. The response had been swift and clear. The Corvani Empire, which ruled 200 worlds with technology the Zephrians had given them, sent a formal reply. They regretted that they could not spare any ships at this time. They were dealing with minor pirate raids along their borders. Perhaps in a few years, when the situation had stabilized, the Vekmori Confederacy expressed deep sympathy for the Zephrian situation. However, their military was currently engaged in important training exercises. They could not interrupt these exercises without causing serious damage to their defense capabilities. The Veltar Commonwealth was very concerned about the Devourer threat. They had voted to form a committee to study the problem. This committee would need at least 18 months to reach any conclusions. They promised to send observers to monitor the situation, one by one. Every major power in the galaxy found reasons to avoid helping. Some claimed they did not have enough ships. Others said they needed more information before they could act. Many simply ignored the messages entirely. The smaller races tried to help, but they had nothing to offer. The Milani had only 3 ships capable of interstellar travel. The Krith were still recovering from a civil war. The Nexari offered to send medical supplies, but they lived so far away that the supplies would not arrive for years. Ethes stood in the great council chamber of Zephr Prime, reading the latest batch of refusals. Around her the walls showed images of all the races the Zephrians had helped over the millennia, the Corvani children they had saved from plague, the Vekmori colonies they had helped establish, the Veltar explorers they had rescued from disaster. All of them had turned away. "Perhaps we expected too much," said Elder Thizes, one of the oldest Zephrians still alive. He had been there when they first made contact with the Corvani. He had helped design the medical treatments that saved the Vekmori. He had personally taught Veltar engineers how to build their first starships. "We gave freely," Ethes replied. "We never asked for payment. We never demanded loyalty. We thought that kindness would create friendship. Perhaps we were naive." Thizes said sadly. The truth was becoming clear. The other races had never seen the Zephrians as friends. They had seen them as a resource to be used. When the Zephrians were strong and giving, they were welcomed. Now that the Zephrians needed help, they had become inconvenient. There was something else too, something that Ethes was only beginning to understand. The Zephrians had always been the leaders of galactic civilization. They had the most advanced technology. They had the most knowledge. They had the most influence. If the Zephrians were destroyed, who would take their place? The answer was obvious. The same races that were now refusing to help would divide up Zephrian territory among themselves. They would claim Zephrian technology and knowledge. They would take over the trade routes and the research stations. They were not just abandoning an ally. They were eliminating a competitor. "How long do we have?" asked Elder Thizes. Ethes looked at the tactical display. Red dots showed the locations of Devourer swarms. They were moving steadily toward the core systems, toward Zephr Prime. 3 weeks, she said. Maybe 4 if we sacrifice the outer colonies. The elder nodded slowly. He had lived for over 1,000 years. He had seen the rise of a dozen civilizations. He had watched the galaxy grow from a collection of isolated worlds into a community of species. Then we will face this alone, he said. We will send one final message, Ethes decided. We will tell them exactly what they are choosing. The message was broadcast on all frequencies to every world in the galaxy. Ethes herself spoke the words, standing in the crystal gardens of Zephr Prime, with her people gathered around her. "To our friends in the Galactic Council," she began. "We have watched the Devourers consume 23 star systems. We have seen billions of sentient beings destroyed. We have fought alone for 8 months, spending our ships and our lives to slow this threat. We asked for allies. We received silence. We asked for aid. We received excuses. We asked for friendship. We received abandonment. The Devourers will reach Zephr Prime in 18 days. After they finish with us, they will continue toward the core worlds. They will come for the Corvani Empire. They will come for the Thekmori Confederacy. They will come for the Veltar Commonwealth. When that day arrives, remember this moment. Remember that you chose to let us die alone. Remember that you traded the lives of your oldest friends for a few more months of safety. We forgive you, because that is who we are. But the galaxy will. Remember what you chose to forget? We are Zephrians. We have always stood for peace, knowledge, and hope. We will face the darkness as we have lived, together and without fear. This is our final transmission. May those who come after us build a better galaxy than the one we leave behind." The message ended. Across the galaxy, billions of beings heard it. Some felt shame, some felt fear, some felt nothing at all. On Zephr Prime, the Zephrians prepared for their last battle. They had asked for allies and received silence. Now they would show the galaxy what that silence truly cost. The Devourers arrived on a Tuesday, just as Ethes had predicted. The battle lasted for 3 days. When it was over, there were no more Zephrians. There were no more crystal cities. There was only an empty system and the sound of the Devourers moving toward the next target. The galaxy had lost its teachers, its guides, its moral center. And in the growing darkness, something else was stirring. On a small blue world that the Zephrians had once visited, a young species was looking up at the stars and dreaming of the day they would join the community of worlds. They had no idea what kind of galaxy they were about to enter. Captain Elena Vasquez stared at the display screen in front of her. She had been in space for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The sensors were showing massive structures floating in the darkness. They looked like cities, made of glass and light, but they were broken now, dead. "Are we sure this is safe?" asked Lieutenant Torres from his station. He was young and nervous. This was only his 3rd mission beyond Earth's solar system. "Define safe," Elena replied. "We're 300 light-years from home, looking at the ruins of an alien civilization. Safe went out the window when we took this job." The Endeavor was not a big ship. She was an exploration vessel, built for long-range missions. Her crew of 30 had volunteered for the most dangerous job humanity had to offer: first contact with alien civilizations. They had been traveling for 6 months, following signals that had been detected by Earth's deep space monitoring stations. Dr. James Tune floated over to the captain's chair. In the low gravity of the ship, everyone moved carefully. He was the team's expert on alien cultures and languages. If anyone could figure out what had happened here, it would be him. "Captain, the radio signals are definitely artificial," he said. "But they're old." "Very old. I'm picking up what looks like automated distress beacons, but they've been broadcasting for at least 6 months. Elena nodded. Earth had detected the signals 8 months ago, but it had taken them 2 months to prepare the mission and 6 months to travel here. Whatever had happened to these aliens, they were too late to help. "What about life signs?" she asked. "Nothing," said Dr. Martinez, the ship's biologist. "No organic readings at all. Whatever lived here is gone." Elena made her decision. "We're going in." Chun, I want you monitoring all frequencies. If there are any survivors, we need to find them. Torres, take us closer to the largest structure. The Endeavor moved slowly through the debris field. As they got closer, the size of the structures became clear. The smallest ones were larger than any building on Earth. The largest was the size of a city. They were all made from some kind of crystal that still glowed faintly with internal light. My God, whispered Dr. Chun, these aren't just buildings. They're ships. The entire civilization was mobile. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen pictures of human cities from orbit. Even the largest ones looked tiny compared to these crystal ships. Whatever race had built them, they were far beyond anything humanity could create. Captain, called Torres, I'm reading massive power signatures from that central structure. It's mostly dead, but there are still some systems running. Can we dock with it? I think so. There are what look like docking ports along the side. They're bigger than our ship, but we should be able to make it work. Elena thought about it. This was exactly the kind of decision that could end her career if it went wrong. But it could also be the most important discovery in human history. Do it, but slowly. If anything looks dangerous, we back out immediately. The docking process took 2 hours. The alien technology was completely different from anything humans had built, but the basic principles were the same. Metal connected. To metal, seals engaged, pressure equalized. Atmosphere is breathable, reported Dr. Martinez. Oxygen, nitrogen, and trace gases. It's a little thin, but we won't need suits. Elena picked her team carefully. Dr. Chun would handle any alien technology they found. Dr. Martinez would look for signs of life. Lieutenant Torres would watch their backs. She would lead. The airlock opened into a corridor that stretched away into darkness. The walls were made of the same crystal as the ship's hull, but they were dim now. Only a few panels still glowed with soft light. Emergency power, guessed Dr. Chun. The main systems are dead, but backup power is still running. They moved slowly through the ship. Everything was built for people who were taller than humans, but thinner. The doorways were high and narrow. The furniture looked like it was made for beings with longer limbs. Look at this, Dr. Martinez called from a side room. She was standing in what looked like a laboratory. Tables covered with alien equipment lined the walls. But it was all dead now, covered with a thin layer of dust. Dr. Chun was studying symbols on the walls. They looked like writing, but they moved and shifted as he watched. The language is dynamic, he said with excitement. The symbols change, meaning based on context. This is incredibly advanced. They found the bodies in the next room. They were tall and thin, just as Elena had expected. Their skin had a silver color, and they had large eyes that were now closed forever. They looked peaceful, as if they had simply gone to sleep. No signs of violence, Dr. Martinez said after examining them. No disease. They just living. How many? Elena asked. Hundreds in this section alone? This ship must have held thousands. They continued deeper into the ship. Every room told the same story. Advanced technology, peaceful inhabitants, and sudden death. There were no weapons visible anywhere, no signs of fighting. These people had died without violence. It was Dr. Chun who found the data core. Captain, you need to see this, he called from what looked like a command center. In the middle of the room was a sphere of crystal that still pulsed with faint light. I think this is their main computer system, Elena approached carefully. Can you access it? I think so. The interface seems to respond to touch. Dr. Chun placed his hand on the crystal. Immediately, symbols began to appear in the air around them. It's some kind of holographic display. Can you understand any of it? Dr. Ching worked for hours trying to decode the alien language. The computer seemed to be trying to help, showing simpler symbols when he looked confused. Gradually, a picture began to emerge. They called themselves the Zephrians, he reported. This was their flagship, the Eternal Dawn. They were teachers, explorers. They traveled the galaxy helping other species develop. Elena felt a growing sense of awe. How long? 3,000 years. They made contact with dozens of different species. They shared technology, medicine, knowledge. They never conquered anyone. They just helped. What happened to them? Dr. Chin's face grew grim as he continued to decode the records. Something called the Devourers. They came from outside the galaxy. They consumed entire worlds, turning everything into more of themselves. The holographic display showed images that made Elena's stomach turn. Swarms of metallic creatures descending on planets. Cities being torn apart and absorbed. Millions of beings disappearing into hungry machines. The Zephrians fought them, Dr. Chun continued, for months. They sent messages to every species. They had helped, asking for aid. Did anyone come? Dr. Chin was quiet for a long moment. No one came. They all had excuses. They were too busy, too far away, too afraid. Elena felt anger building in her chest. They let them die alone? Worse than that. Dr. Chun had found more records. Some of these species owed their entire existence to the Zephrians. The Corvani were saved from a plague. The Devourers were given spaceflight technology. The Veltar were rescued from a dying world. And they all turned away when the Zephrians needed help. Yes, the final log entry is from their leader, someone called Ethes, she says, ... She says they asked for allies and got silence. Elena looked around at the dead ship. These people had spent 3,000 years helping others. They had given freely of their knowledge and technology. And when they faced extinction, every species they had saved found reasons to abandon them. Where are the Devourers now? She asked. Dr. Chun checked the star charts. Unknown. The records show they continued, moving toward the galactic core after destroying the Zephrians. But that was 6 months ago. And the other species? The ones who abandoned them? Still out there? Still ruling their empires with technology the Zephrians gave them. Elena felt sick. She had grown up believing that space exploration would bring humanity into contact with wise, benevolent aliens. She had imagined joining a galactic community of peace and cooperation. Instead, she had found evidence of the greatest betrayal in galactic history. Captain, Torres called from the communications station. I'm picking up a signal. Someone's coming. Elena hurried to the display. A ship was approaching, much larger than the Endeavor. Its design was different from the Zephrian vessels, more angular, more aggressive. Are they scanning us? She asked. Yes, and they're trying to communicate. The message came through in broken English. Earth radio transmissions had apparently been monitored for decades. Human vessel, you are trespassing in restricted space. Prepare to be boarded. Elena made a quick decision. Chun, download everything you can from that computer. Torres, prepare for company. Martinez, hide the data storage devices. The alien ship docked with them 20 minutes later. The beings who came aboard were shorter than the Zephrians, with thick gray skin and small eyes. They wore uniforms that suggested military organization. Their leader introduced himself as Commander Zelphic of the Corvani Empire. He looked around the Endeavor with obvious disdain. So, the humans have finally achieved interstellar travel, he said. His English was good, though heavily accented. We have been monitoring your primitive radio signals for some time. Elena forced herself to remain polite. We're explorers. We came here following radio signals. Ah yes, the Zephrian ghosts. Zelphic's expression showed no emotion. You should not waste time on their ruins. They were weak. The galaxy is stronger without them. Elena wanted to punch him. These ghosts had saved his entire species from extinction. Instead, she kept her voice level. What happened to them? They faced an enemy they could not defeat. They asked for help, but help costs resources. The galaxy could not afford to waste ships and lives on a doomed cause. So you let them die? Zelphic shrugged. They chose to fight an unwinnable war. We chose to survive. Which choice seems wiser to you? Elena looked at this alien who owed his life to the people he was now dismissing. She thought about the peaceful Zephrian bodies lying in their crystal ships. She thought about 3,000 years of selfless service ending in abandonment and silence. I suppose that depends on what kind of person you want to be, she said quietly. Zelphic laughed. Idealism is a luxury for children, human. In the real galaxy, only the strong survive. Perhaps you will learn this in time. After the Corvani left, Elena gathered her crew in the ship's meeting room. Dr. Chun had managed to download massive amounts of data from the Zephrian computers. It would take months to analyze it all. What do we do with this information? Asked Dr. Martinez. Elena thought about it. Earth was still decades away from being a real power in the galaxy. Humanity had maybe 100 ships capable of interstellar travel. Their weapons were primitive. Their technology was basic compared to what they had seen, but they had something else. Something that apparently no other species in the galaxy possessed. Anymore, we remember, she said finally. We remember what happened here. We remember what the Zephrians stood for. And we make sure that when humanity becomes a power in this galaxy, we don't become like them. She looked around at her crew. They were young and idealistic, full of hope about humanity's future among the stars. She didn't want to crush that hope, but they needed to understand what they were walking into. The galaxy is ruled by species who abandoned their greatest benefactors when it became inconvenient to help them. They let the most peaceful, most generous people in galactic history die alone because saving them might have cost resources. What does that mean for us? Asked Torres. Elena stood up and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the descendants of the Zephrians' former allies were living comfortable lives built on technology and knowledge they had been given for free. None of them seemed to feel any guilt about what they had done. It means we know what kind of galaxy we're entering, she said. It means we know what the major powers really are. And it means we have a choice to make about what kind of species humanity is going to be. The Endeavor left Zephrian space the next day carrying the most important cargo in human history. Not alien technology or weapons, but knowledge. Knowledge of what the galaxy really was and what it had chosen to become. Elena filed her report with Earth Command when they reached the next communication relay. She told them about the Zephrians, about their 3,000 years of service, and about how the galaxy had repaid them. She also made a recommendation. Humanity should approach the galactic community carefully. They should watch and listen before making any commitments. And they should never, ever forget the lesson of the Zephrians. The galaxy had abandoned its teachers. Now humanity would have to decide whether to become students of that betrayal, or to choose a different path entirely. As the Endeavor continued toward home, Elena looked back one last time at the dark system where the Zephrians had died. She made a silent promise to their memory. Humanity would remember. And when the time came, they would choose differently. The question was whether they would be strong enough to keep that promise when it really mattered. Dr. Sarah Kim had been studying alien cultures for 5 years when she made the discovery that would change everything. She was sitting in her small office at the Human Diplomatic Station, surrounded by data files and empty coffee cups. Outside her window, ships from a dozen different species came and went from the busy space station. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 3 years now. They had established trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic relations. On the surface, everything seemed normal. The major powers welcomed Earth's newest species with polite interest, but Sarah had been digging deeper. It had started with the Zephrians. Captain Vasquez's report from the Endeavor had been classified, but Sarah had security clearance. She had read every word, studied every image, analyzed every piece of data they had brought back. The story bothered her. 3,000 years of helping others, only to be abandoned when they needed help. It seemed too convenient that every major power had found excuses to avoid helping the galaxy's greatest benefactors. So Sarah had started looking into galactic history. What she found made her stomach turn. The Melthari had been master gardeners. They could take dead worlds and turn them into paradises. For 2,000 years they had helped other species colonize hostile planets. They had turned frozen rocks into green worlds where millions could live. Then a plague had hit their homeworld. It was engineered, designed to target their specific Biology, the Melthari had begged for medical help from the species they had helped. They offered to share their terraforming secrets in exchange for aid. The response had been the same. Committees were formed. Studies were commissioned. Emergency aid was promised but never delivered. The Melthari died slowly while the galaxy watched and did nothing. Within 10 years of their extinction, their garden worlds had been claimed by other species. The Corvani took 12 systems, the Vekmori claimed 8, the Veltar grabbed 6 more. Coincidence, Sarah had thought at first, but then she found the Sithkari records. The Sithkari had been artists beyond imagination. They created sculptures that moved through dimensions, music that could heal mental illness, and paintings that showed the viewer their deepest dreams. Every major museum in the galaxy contained Sithkari art. They had shared their knowledge freely, teaching other species how to create beauty in a cold universe. They had been peaceful, generous, and trusting. The economic warfare that destroyed them had been subtle. Trade routes were redirected, shipping costs mysteriously increased. Materials they needed became unavailable. Slowly, systematically, they were cut off from the galactic economy. When they asked for help, they were told it was just market forces. The galaxy was sorry, but these things happened. Perhaps they should consider selling some of their art too. Raise funds. The Sithkari had refused to sell their sacred works. They had starved instead, holding on to their principles until the end. After they died, their art was collected by estate sales and legal salvage operations. Every piece ended up in the collections of the same species that had destroyed their economy. Sarah found 17 more examples. Each time, the pattern was the same. A species would develop something valuable, something that made other species stronger, richer, or more advanced. They would share this gift freely because they believed in cooperation and mutual benefit. Then, when that species faced a crisis, the galaxy would abandon them. Not quickly, not obviously, but through careful inaction, bureaucratic delays, and convenient excuses. After they were gone, their contributions would be absorbed by the survivors. The Uthani had been the galaxy's greatest explorers. They had mapped dangerous space, found lost civilizations, and discovered new trade routes. When something began hunting them systematically, they called for military aid. The Galactic Council had formed a committee to study the request. The committee had met for 6 months while the Uthani were picked off one by one. By the time aid was finally approved, there were no Uthani left to save. Their star maps and exploration data were immediately claimed by other species for safekeeping. The Vexhi had developed medicine that could cure genetic diseases. They had freely shared it with every species that asked. When a quantum virus began destroying their DNA, they begged for help developing a cure. The galaxy had expressed deep concern. Medical experts were consulted. Research was promised. But somehow, the cure was always just a few months away from being ready. The Vexhi died while waiting for help that never came. Their medical knowledge was preserved in the archives of the Corvani Medical Institute. Sarah spent months confirming her theory. She interviewed refugees, studied classified documents, and traced the flow of technology and resources through galactic history. The pattern was clear. The galaxy's major powers had created a system where promising species were cultivated like crops. They were allowed to develop their gifts, encouraged to share freely, and praised for their generosity. Then, when they became too successful or too influential, they were harvested. A crisis would emerge. Help would be promised but delayed. Committees would form, studies would be commissioned, and time would run out. The victims always died believing they had been abandoned by accident. They never realized they had been murdered by design. Sarah called it the Harvest Protocol. She wrote a report that laid out the evidence in careful detail. The galaxy was not a community of equals. It was a feeding ground where the strong cultivated the weak until they were ready to be consumed. The report was sent to Earth's High Command. Within a week, Sarah was called to a meeting with Admiral Chunwei, the man who had taken over Earth's military after Captain Vasquez retired. "This is disturbing," Admiral Chun said, reading through Sarah's data. Are you sure about these conclusions? I've checked everything 3 times, Sarah replied. The pattern is consistent across 2 millennia of galactic history. Every species that contributed something significant was eventually eliminated when they became inconvenient. What about species that survived? They either developed nothing valuable or they were part of the system doing the harvesting. Admiral. Shin was quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked, "What does this mean for humanity?" Sarah had been dreading that question. We're developing faster than expected. Our technology is advancing rapidly. We've made significant contributions to medicine, engineering, and military tactics, which makes us valuable, which makes us a target. Admiral Chun closed the report and looked at Sarah directly. How long do we have? Unknown. The pattern suggests they wait until a species is fully integrated into galactic society before moving against them. We're still new enough to be ignored, but not for long. No, not for long. The next phase of Sarah's investigation was more dangerous. She began traveling to other systems, ostensibly for cultural research. What she was really doing was looking for survivors. She found them on the edges of galactic civilization, hiding in forgotten systems and asteroid belts. They were the remnants of harvested species. The few who had escaped the systematic destruction of their people, Elder Thizes, lived in a hidden station in the Outer Rim. He was the last Zephrian, ancient beyond human understanding. He had survived the fall of his people by being on a deep space mission when the Devourers attacked. I have watched for 50 years, he told Sarah. I have seen the galaxy celebrate our memory while forgetting our sacrifice. They build monuments to Zephrian wisdom while using the very weapons they refused to share with us. Sarah showed him her research. Thizes looked at the data with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. You understand, he said. Finally, you see what we could not. We believed in their friendship because we wanted to believe. We thought that kindness would create loyalty. What created the system? Sarah asked. Fear, Thizes replied. Fear of being replaced? Fear of losing power? The strong species realized that if they helped everyone become strong, they would no longer be special. So they decided to prevent anyone else from becoming truly strong. Yes, they created a galaxy where advancement was punished by extinction. Only those who served the system were allowed to survive. Sarah met with other survivors. Kexhai, the last of the quantum healers. Morthani, one of 3 surviving deep space explorers. Silkari, who carried the artistic traditions of her extinct people, each had the same story. Their people had trusted the galaxy's promises of friendship and cooperation. They had shared freely, believing that generosity would be returned. They had died when they learned the truth. Why don't you tell people what really happened? Sarah asked Kexhai. The alien's laugh was bitter. Who would believe us? We are refugees with no power, no influence, no proof that anyone would accept. The major powers control all communication, all education, all history. The official records make our people look weak, added Morthani. They say we died because we were primitive or unlucky or made poor decisions. They never mention the help that was promised and never delivered. Sarah realized that the survivors were not just hiding to avoid persecution. They were hiding because their very existence was evidence of the galaxy's crimes. As long as they remained silent and forgotten, the system could continue. What happens when someone finds out? She asked. You mean like you have? Thizes said. Nothing. What can you do? Your species is still weak. You have no allies who would believe you. And if you become too troublesome... He didn't need to finish. Sarah understood. Humanity was walking into the same trap that had consumed every other promising species in galactic history. When Sarah returned to Earth, she found that the situation had already begun to change. Humanity's contributions to galactic civilization were being noticed. Their medical advances were saving lives. Their engineering solutions were improving infrastructure. Their military innovations were making space safer. The praise was growing louder. Humanity was being called promising, valuable, and essential to galactic progress. Sarah recognized the words. She had seen them in every historical record. She had studied. They were the same words used to describe the Zephrians, the Melthari, the Sithkari, and all the others before their harvesting began. She tried to warn people, but her classified report could only reach a few. Most humans were excited about their acceptance into galactic society. They saw the praise as evidence that they belonged among the stars. Sarah knew better. The praise was not acceptance. It was the sound of farmers admiring their ripening crops. The first test came sooner than expected. A young species called the Cathara had developed revolutionary space-folding technology. Their ships could cross the galaxy in hours instead of months. They were eager to share this gift with their new galactic friends. Then the void touched appeared. Sarah had never heard of them before, but the survivors in the outer rim knew the name. They were one of several crisis species that appeared whenever the harvest protocol needed to be activated. They are real, Vices assured her, but they are also convenient. They appear when someone needs to be eliminated, and they disappear when the job is done. Are you saying they're controlled? I am saying that in 2,000 years of galactic history, they have never attacked a major power. They only appear to threaten species that have something valuable to contribute. Sarah watched the news feeds as the void touched began systematically destroying Cathara colonies. She watched the Galactic Council convene to discuss the crisis. She listened to the familiar excuses about insufficient resources and strategic complications. The Cathara sent desperate messages throughout the galaxy, offering to share their space-folding technology in exchange for military aid. They promised anything, everything, if someone would just help them survive. Sarah knew how this would end. The council would deliberate for months while the Cathara died. When the last of them was gone, their technology would be salvaged by the same species that had refused to help them, but this time something was different. This time humanity was watching, and humanity had learned from the Zephrians what that silence really meant. The question was whether they would choose to break the pattern or become part of it. Sarah prepared her final report, knowing it might be the most important document in human history. The galaxy had revealed its true nature. Now humanity had to decide what kind of species they wanted to be. Would they join the harvesters, or would they stand with the harvested? The answer would determine not just humanity's future, but the future of every species that came after them. The age of the harvest protocol was about to face its greatest challenge. For the first time in 2,000 years, someone was preparing to say no. Ambassador Maria Santos stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, watching history repeat itself. The massive chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds, all pretending to care about the crisis facing the Cathara. People, on the central display, images showed Cathara colonies being torn apart by the void touched. These strange entities moved through space like living shadows, tearing holes in reality itself. They seemed to feed on the energy that powered Cathara space-folding technology. Maria had read Dr. Sarah Kim's classified reports. She knew this was not random. She knew the pattern. She understood what was really happening in this chamber. The Cathara ambassador stood at the speaking platform, his forearms gesturing desperately as he pleaded for help. His people were tall and thin, with skin that changed color based on their emotions. Right now, his skin was the deep purple of fear and desperation. "We offer our technology freely," Ambassador Velka said, his voice breaking. "Our space-folding drives, our quantum computers, our dimensional mathematics, take it all. We only ask that you help us survive." The chamber was quiet except for the soft humming of translation devices. Maria looked around at the faces of the major power representatives. She had learned to read their expressions over the past 3 years of diplomatic service. The Corvani representative, General Mortak, looked bored. He was checking data pads and whispering with his aides. The Vekmori delegation was having a quiet discussion among themselves, completely ignoring the Cathara's pleas. The Veltar ambassador was actually sleeping, his head nodding as he dozed in his chair. None of them were surprised by what they were hearing. None of them seemed concerned about the extinction of an entire species. They had done this before. Council. Speaker Zaxron called for responses from the major powers. The Corvani spoke first, as they always did. The Corvani Empire sympathizes deeply with the Cathara situation, General Mordic said without standing up. However, our military forces are currently engaged in important border security operations. We cannot spare ships for external conflicts at this time. Maria wanted to scream. She had seen the intelligence reports. The Corvani border security operations involved chasing pirates with outdated weapons. They had more than enough ships. To help the Cathara, the Thekmori representative was next. The Confederacy recognizes the severity of this threat, she said in a flat voice. We are prepared to form a study committee to analyze the void touched and develop long-term countermeasures. How long would this study take? Asked Ambassador Velkith, his skin now showing desperate hope. Approximately 18 to 24 months for a preliminary report. The Cathara ambassador's skin turned black with despair. We do not have 18 months. Our homeworld will fall within 6 weeks. These things take time, the Thekmori replied. Proper analysis cannot be rushed. The Veltar ambassador woke up long enough to offer observers and humanitarian aid. When pressed for details, he admitted that the aid would consist of emergency shelters that could be delivered in 8 to 10 months. Other powers gave similar responses. The Nexari offered to send medical supplies to help treat void-touched injuries, but admitted they had no idea how to actually treat such wounds. The Korth suggested prayer vigils. The Milani promised to remember the Cathara in their historical records. Maria had heard enough. She stood up from the human delegation seats and walked toward the speaking platform. This was not part of the planned agenda. She was supposed to observe and report back to Earth, but watching this charade continue was more than she could bear. Speaker Zaxron, she called out. The human delegation requests permission to address the council. The chamber fell silent. Humanity was still a minor power with only a few dozen systems. They rarely spoke in council sessions and never on major issues like this. The human delegation is recognized, Speaker Zaxron said, looking confused. Maria walked to the center of the chamber. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her. Most of the major power representatives looked annoyed at the interruption. Members of the council, she began. We have listened to your responses to the Cathara crisis. We have heard your reasons for inaction. We understand your positions. She paused and looked around the chamber. We also understand what those positions really mean. General Mordic stood up. The human delegation is out of order. This council does not need lectures from primitives who have barely learned to travel between stars. Maria smiled coldly. You are absolutely right, General. We are primitives. We have been in space for less than a century. We have no great weapons. No ancient wisdom, no vast fleets. She gestured toward the display showing the burning Cathara worlds. But we do understand something that this council seems to have forgotten. We understand what it means to show up when someone needs help. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives from the major powers were shouting about protocol violations and inappropriate behavior. Maria waited for them to quiet down. 3 years ago, she continued, humanity made first contact with galactic civilization. We were told we were joining a community of peace and cooperation. We were told that species helped each other in times of crisis. She pulled out a datapad and began reading. The Zephrians helped 37 species achieve spaceflight. When they faced the Devourers, those same 37 species found excuses to abandon them. General Mortak tried to interrupt, but Maria kept speaking. The Melthari turned dead worlds into gardens for dozens of species. When plague threatened their homeworld, their former beneficiaries were too busy to help. The Sithkari shared the gift of beauty with the galaxy. When economic warfare destroyed them, the galaxy watched them starve. Maria looked directly at General Mortak. The Corvani Empire exists because the Zephrians saved your species from extinction 2,000 years ago. Your technology, your medicine, your very survival came from their generosity. And when they needed you, you let them die alone. Those are ancient history, Mortix snarled. The galaxy has moved beyond such primitive thinking, has it? Maria asked. Because from where I stand, it looks like the galaxy has perfected a system, find promising species. Let them develop valuable contributions. Praise their generosity. Then, when they become inconvenient, find reasons to let them die. She turned to address the entire council. You call it politics? You call it pragmatism? You call it the harsh realities of galactic civilization. We call it what it is, murder. The chamber was in chaos now. Representatives were demanding that Maria be removed. Speaker Zaxron was calling for order. But Maria was not finished. The Cathara are offering you technology that could revolutionize space travel. They are offering it freely, asking only that you help them survive. And you are going to let them die, just like all the others. She looked at Ambassador Velkith, whose skin was cycling through colors of confusion and hope. Ambassador, you're... People asked for allies. In 6 weeks, when the void touched reach your homeworld, you will discover what this council's friendship is really worth. Maria turned back to the major powers. But today, something is different. Today, someone is watching who remembers what real friendship means. General Mortak laughed. What can your primitive species possibly do? You have a few dozen ships and weapons that are centuries behind our technology. You are absolutely right, Maria said. We cannot match your fleets. We cannot match your weapons. We cannot match your technology. She paused and looked around the chamber one more time. But we can do something none of you have done in 2,000 years. We can show up. The chamber fell silent. Even the major power representatives seemed stunned by what they were hearing. The human delegation formally volunteers to provide military assistance to the Cathara people, Maria announced. We will commit our entire deep space fleet to their defense. That is military suicide, the Vekmori representative said. Your ships will be destroyed in minutes. Probably, Maria agreed, but they will not face extinction alone. Ambassador Velkith stood up, his skin now showing brilliant silver patterns of amazement. The humans would do this? For strangers? For people you barely know? Maria thought about Captain Vasquez finding the Zephrian ruins. She thought about Dr. Kim discovering the truth about galactic history. She thought about all the species who had died alone because no one was willing to stand with them. Ambassador, she said, 3 years ago we discovered the ruins of the Zephrians. We learned about their 3,000 years of service to the galaxy. We learned about their final message when they faced extinction. She pulled up the Zephrian, recording on her datapad. Ethes appeared as a hologram, speaking her final words. We asked for allies. We received silence. The galaxy has been silent for too long, Maria said. Today, humanity chooses to be the voice that answers. The chamber erupted again, but this time the sound was different. The major powers were angry, but some of the smaller species were cheering. The survivors, the forgotten peoples, the ones who had been abandoned by the system. General Mortok stood up and pointed at Maria. This is madness. You will accomplish nothing except the destruction of your own people. Is that what humans call wisdom? Maria smiled. General, we call it the right thing to do. She turned to Ambassador Velkith. We cannot promise victory. We cannot promise that our help will be enough. But we can promise that when the void touched come for your people, they will find human ships standing between them and your worlds. The Cathara ambassador's skin was now showing patterns of gold and white that Maria had never seen before. According to her briefings, those were the colors of hope and gratitude. Why? He asked. Why would you risk everything for us? Maria thought about her answer carefully. This moment would be remembered. This choice would define what humanity became in the galaxy. Because we believe the galaxy should be better than this, she said finally. Because we believe that friendship means showing up when it matters. Because we believe that some things are more important than survival. She looked around the chamber one more time. The human delegation is returning to Earth to prepare our fleet. Ambassador Velketh, we will contact you within 72 hours to coordinate our response. As she walked toward the exit, General Morda called after her. When your ships are destroyed and your people are dead, remember that we warned you. Maria stopped and turned back. General, when this is over, remember that we offered you a chance to be something better than what you are. Remember that you chose to remain silent while others suffered. And remember, she added, that humanity chose differently. Maria left the chamber knowing that she had just committed her species to what might be a hopeless war. Earth's entire deep space fleet was maybe 300 ships. They were facing an enemy that had destroyed advanced Cathara vessels with ease, but as she walked through the corridors of the space station, something unexpected happened. Representatives from smaller species began approaching her. Survivors of the harvest species, forgotten peoples who had been abandoned by the galaxy. Ambassador, said an elderly alien she recognized as one of the last Earthani explorers. If humanity is truly going to stand with the Cathara, you will not stand alone. What do you mean? There are more of us than the major powers know, survivors. Refugees, the forgotten children of extinct civilizations. We have been hiding for centuries, waiting for someone to show us that the galaxy could be different. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. How many? Hundreds of ships. Thousands of people who remember what it means to have others turn away when you need them most. The old explorer's eyes were bright with an emotion Maria had not expected. To see. Hope. If humanity is willing to stand against this system, he continued, then perhaps it is time for all of us to stand together. As Maria made her way back to the human delegation's quarters, she realized that something had changed. For the first time in galactic history, someone had said no to the Harvest Protocol. The question now was whether that would be enough to save the Cathara, or whether it would simply mean that humanity would join the long list of species who had died for believing in something better. Either way, the age of silence was over. The galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Chunwei stood on the bridge of the Terra's Hope, watching the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled prepare for what might be their final battle. 300 ships stretched out in formation around him. Most of them had been cargo vessels just weeks ago. Now they carried weapons that Earth's engineers had built in desperate haste. Admiral, called Captain Torres from the communications station, we're receiving signals from the Cathara homeworld. The void touched have entered their system. Chun nodded grimly. He had known this day would come ever since Ambassador Santos made her promise to the Galactic Council. The question was whether humanity would arrive in time to make any difference. How long until we reach the Cathara system? He asked. 6 hours, replied his navigation officer. But sir, the long-range sensors are picking up something else. Multiple fleets converging. On the same location? Chun frowned. Major powers? No, sir. These are smaller groups, different technologies. Some of the designs don't match anything in our databases. Chun walked to the sensor display and studied the readings. Dozens of small fleets were moving toward the Cathara system from all directions. None of them matched the sleek, powerful ships of the Corvani, Thekmori, or Veltar. Sir, Torres called out again. We're receiving a transmission. It's from Elder Thises. Chun remembered that name from Dr. Kim's reports. The last surviving Zephrian, the one who had been hiding in the Outer Rim for decades, the hologram that appeared, showed an ancient figure in a crystalline suit. His silver skin was wrinkled with age, but his eyes were bright with purpose. Admiral Chun, Thises said, I am honored to finally meet the humans who chose to remember what the galaxy forgot. Elder Thises, I read the reports about your people. I'm sorry for what happened to them. Thank you. But today is not about mourning the past. Today is about ensuring it does not repeat. Thises gestured behind him, where Chun could see the bridge of a crystal ship. I bring the last Zephrian vessel, the memory of stars. She has been hidden for 50 years, but today she flies again. Chun felt a chill of awe. You're joining the fight? We all are, Admiral. Every survivor of the harvest. Every forgotten. People, every species that has been abandoned by the galaxy's so-called civilization. Thises smiled sadly. You showed us that it was possible to choose differently. Now we choose to stand with you. Over the next hour, Chen received similar messages from dozens of other commanders. Captain Kexai of the Quantum Healers, bringing 3 medical ships that could treat wounds no one else understood. Commander Morthani of the Deep Space Explorers, leading a fleet of ships that could navigate impossible territories. Artist Captain Silkari of the Sithkari Remnant, whose vessels moved like living poems through space. Each message was the same. They were done hiding, they were done being silent. They were ready to stand together when the combined fleet dropped. Out of hyperspace at the edge of the Cathara system, Chun could hardly believe what he saw. Nearly 2,000 ships had gathered, representing dozens of species that the galaxy thought were extinct, but it was still not enough to avoid. Touched filled the inner system like a dark cancer. There were thousands of them, each one the size of a city. They moved through space in impossible ways, bending reality around themselves. Cathara ships tried to fight them, but their weapons passed harmlessly through the entities. Twisted forms, the Cathara homeworld was already under attack. Chen could see the planet cities burning as the void tore holes in the atmosphere itself. "This is Admiral Chen of the human fleet," he broadcast on all frequencies. "All ships, prepare for combat, we're going in." The first wave of the attack was a disaster. Human weapons were designed to fight solid targets. The void existed partially outside normal space, making them nearly impossible to hit. Chin watched in horror as dozens of ships were destroyed in the first few minutes, but the survivors kept fighting. And they kept learning. Dr. James Chun, now elderly but still brilliant, had been working on the problem for weeks. His breakthrough came when he realized that the void were vulnerable to weapons that existed in folded spacetime. "Admiral," he called from the science station, "the Cathara space-folding technology. If we can modify our weapons to exist in compressed space, they should be able to affect the void touched. How long would that take? With Cathara help, maybe hours, but we need to buy time." Admiral Chen made the hardest decision of his life. "All ships, this is Admiral Chun. Begin defensive pattern Delta. Protect the Cathara engineers while they work on the weapons modification." For the next 6 hours, the combined fleet fought a desperate holding action. Ships were destroyed by the dozens as they threw themselves between the void and the remaining Cathara worlds. But they held the line. Elder Thises proved that Zephrian technology was still the most advanced in the galaxy. His crystal ship moved like liquid light, drawing the attention of dozens of void and somehow avoiding their attacks. The quantum healers kept damaged ships, fighting by healing their crews faster than they could be injured. The explorer ships used their knowledge of dangerous space to predict where the void would appear next. And through it all, the human fleet kept pushing forward. They lost ship after ship, but they never retreated. And they had promised to stand with the Cathara, and they would keep that promise no matter the cost. The breakthrough came when Ambassador Velkif himself joined the research team. Working with human engineers and scientists from a dozen species, he managed to create the first fold mine. It was a weapon that existed in compressed spacetime, invisible to normal sensors but devastating to entities that fed on dimensional energy. The first test was incredible. A single fold mine destroyed 3 void instantly. Their twisted forms simply unraveled as the weapon tore apart the space they occupied. "All ships," Admiral Chun broadcast. "We have working weapons. Begin fold mine deployment immediately." The tide of battle turned slowly. The combined fleet began pushing the void back from the Cathara worlds. More importantly, they began working together in ways that surprised everyone. Human tactical flexibility combined with Zephrian technology. Cathara space folding supported by explorer navigation skills. Quantum healing keeping everyone alive while they learned to fight an impossible enemy. For the first time in galactic history, the abandoned peoples were fighting as one. It took 3 days to clear the Cathara system of void When the last entity was destroyed, Admiral Chun found himself commanding the most powerful fleet in known space. Not because they had the best ships or weapons, But because they had something no major power possessed, trust. The victory celebration was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth. The Galactic Council was demanding explanations. The major powers were mobilizing their fleets. Humanity was being accused of violating dozens of treaties and regulations. Admiral, Ambassador Santos called from Earth. The Council is threatening sanctions and military action if we don't withdraw from Cathara space immediately. Chun looked around at the fleet that had formed around his ships. Thousands of vessels from species that were supposed to be extinct, all of them looking to humanity for leadership. Tell the Council, he said slowly, that we are not in Cathara space anymore. What do you mean? We are in Alliance space. The Cathara have joined the Alliance of Free Peoples, along with every other species that chose to stand together today. Over the following weeks, the transformation became clear. The Alliance controlled some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Zephrian crystal tech, Cathara space folding, quantum healing, dimensional weapons, and exploration knowledge that mapped regions the major powers had never seen. More importantly, they controlled the loyalty of dozens of species that had been written off as extinct or irrelevant. Trade routes began shifting toward Alliance space. Young species that achieved spaceflight found themselves with a choice. They could join the traditional Galactic Council system, where they would be cultivated and eventually harvested. Or they could join the Alliance, where they would be protected and supported unconditionally. Most chose the Alliance. The major powers tried to respond. They sent fleets to intimidate Alliance worlds. They imposed trade sanctions. They threatened military action, but something had changed in the galaxy. For the first time in 2,000 years, the abandoned peoples had somewhere to go. The forgotten species had found their voice. The harvest victims had become the harvester's worst nightmare, people who remembered what betrayal felt like. 6 months after the Battle of Cathara, General Mordek of the Corvani Empire requested a private meeting with Ambassador Santos. They met on a neutral space station, with both of them knowing that the balance of power had shifted forever. You have destroyed the natural order of the galaxy, Mortek said bluntly. The strong were meant to rule, the weak were meant to serve. Santos looked at the Corvani general with pity. General, the Zephrians were the strongest species in galactic history. Your people called them weak when you let them die alone. They were weak because they lost. They lost because everyone they had helped turned away from them. Santos leaned forward. Tell me, General, when the Alliance becomes stronger than the Corvani Empire, will that make you weak? Mortek's expression darkened. You cannot maintain this coalition forever. Your alliance will break apart. Competing interests will divide you. Maybe, Santos agreed. But right now, we have something you never had. We have allies who know we will show up when they need us. And what happens when someone attacks Earth? Will these aliens really risk their lives for humans? Santos smiled. 3 days ago, a pirate fleet attacked one of our outer colonies. Before our ships could respond, Cathara vessels had driven them off. When we thanked Ambassador Velkith, he said something interesting. What? He said, you showed up for us when no one else would. Now we show up for you. This is what friendship means. General Mortak was quiet for a long moment. The Council will not accept this new order. The Council doesn't have to accept it, but they do have to live with it. Santos stood up to leave. General, the galaxy spent 2,000 years teaching species not to trust each other. You taught them that friendship was weakness and loyalty was foolishness. She walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Congratulations. You created a galaxy where showing up for your friends became revolutionary, where basic decency was a form of rebellion, and where kindness, she added, became the most powerful weapon in known space. After the meeting, Santos returned to the Alliance headquarters on New Zephyr, the capital they had built in honor of their first teachers. The crystal spires rose toward the stars, but they were different from the original Zephrian cities. These had contributions from every member species. Human engineering supported Cathara folding architecture. Quantum healing centers provided care for anyone who needed it. Explorer maps showed routes to wonders the major powers had never imagined. On The memorial wall, new words had been added in 100 languages. They asked for allies. They got silence. We asked for allies. We became the answer. Ambassador Santos walked past the memorial every day. She thought about Captain Vasquez discovering the Zephrian ruins. She thought about Dr. Kim uncovering the truth about galactic history. She thought about the moment she chose to stand up in the Galactic Council and say no to 2,000 years of systematic betrayal. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of the Harvest Protocol was over. In its place, something new was growing. Something that remembered what the stars had forgotten, that sometimes the greatest weapon against the darkness was simply refusing to let others face it alone, and that when the choice came between survival and doing what was right, there were still species in the galaxy brave enough to choose both. The Alliance had shown the galaxy a different way. Not through conquest or domination, but through the simple act of keeping their promises. They had asked for allies and gotten silence. So they became the voice that answered when others called for help. The stars would remember.